So I've held, this is my fourth public meeting I've had since the referendum. The last one I had around about 5 weeks ago in Carpen. So what I want to do tonight is just give you a bit of an overview as to where we are, how Parliament's feeling at the moment, kind of the rumourville, what the options are I think that potentially lay ahead of us, and what the risks are, what my role is going to be in all of this in these next few very, very important weeks. But principally I want to hear from you and to take questions and concerns and reactions from you, and hopefully I can, this is most definitely not an exact science, but I will try as best I can to answer as many questions as you have. So just to recap in terms of where we are. So we now have the Prime Minister back from Brussels. We have the withdrawal agreement, the means and the method by which we will leave the EU, and the political declaration. And I'm sure many of you will know this already, but I think it's just worth repeating that the nature of those two documents is very, very different. So the withdrawal agreement is the 500 and odd detailed pages, legally binding. It's a legal document as to how we're going to extract ourselves from the EU, draw a line, and then the political declaration, if you like, is the aspiration for the future. And critically, the part about that is it is not legally binding. It's a vision, it's a plan, it's a hope, a memorandum of understanding, if you like, for how the future for trading between the EU and the UK might look. And it's true to say that everybody knew that we would never have the real shape of the future trade deal until we'd left. We knew that. But still, I think where we are is there are an awful lot of MPs who have considerable concerns about what that future political declaration looked like. And that's why there's been such a big argument in Parliament this week around the legal advice that Cabinet had access to. And constitutionally it's quite unprecedented, but we felt that in such a moment of national significance that we needed to know everything, every bit of legal advice that the government had to enable us as MPs to make the right decision when we vote. Because we need to know what the risks are, and a good parliamentarian wants to know what the risks and the pros and the cons are before they vote. So just very broadly, what is it that MPs don't like about that withdrawal agreement, the political declaration? And the interesting thing is it's not just the people who, the Brexiteers if you like, it's not just the Unionists, it's not just the DUP, it's kind of a real mix of people and MPs. And it's the backstop. We're all probably a little bit tired of hearing about that backstop, but essentially what that is, because the Good Friday Agreement maintaining no hard border in Ireland is of such significant legal importance, there has to be a backstop that in the case of those future trade negotiations breaking down, whatever happens, there won't be a border there. And that causes great difficulty to a lot of people, because the legal small print says that as a country, as a sovereign nation, we can't just pull out of that any time we like. That has to be a decision made with the EU. And that feels like a slight on our sovereignty. Whatever your views are, remain or leave, how can we not be in charge of making our own decisions? And that would potentially would be locked into the customs union forever, but with no say and still paying in. Those of us that are worried about the economy from that angle, and that's probably where I put myself principally, the fact that that political declaration is not legally binding, it can sound great. I can have great faith in Theresa May. But what if it's Boris? What if it's Carpen? Something for everyone. What if there's a different Prime Minister? What if there are different presidents and different Prime Ministers in Europe? The political declaration and aspirations that they have collectively written today could be implemented quite differently by different leaders, and that's the bit that really makes me nervous. Because certainly speaking from my own party's point of view, the worries that we have are that if it were a hard Brexiteer, I hate these labels, but just for simplicity let's use them, that became the Prime Minister, that political declaration could be ripped up tomorrow. And it could be actually, let's just have no deal. And that's the risk with that political declaration not having legal status. And if we paid that 39 billion, the divorce bill, and we don't have any MEPs anymore, and we don't have a veto around the table anymore, just what is left in our negotiating hand? And we've already seen it, haven't we, with Macron, never been so interested in fishing all my life. I tell you, I've had to get up to speed pretty quickly because we're not big. We don't have fish as an issue, particularly in South Cambridgeshire. But we've already had Macron sensing that opportunity. Oh, do you want trade in the future? Well, I'd quite like to fish in your waters. We've had Sanchez in Spain. Well, what about Gibraltar? And that's before the ink is even dry. And that's the bit that worries me. Because I feel like potentially if we sign on the dotted line with that withdrawal agreement, we've lost all our negotiating hands. Everything is gone. And relying on good faith and best endeavours, I want to be that optimistic person. But you know, you're not dealing just with the same people, those people potentially change. And ultimately, it would mean that we were a rule taker, not a rule maker, and that issue of sovereignty again raises its head. And probably one of the most eye-opening aspects when you really get into the detail of this stuff is if the EU, if we were to accept this proposal, if the EU were to make trade deals with new third-party countries, as they are doing all the time, slowly, but they do, we, the UK, would have to grant preferential access to those third countries to our markets. But we wouldn't necessarily benefit from us having access to theirs. And that feels to me, given that so much of this debate is about free trade and access to markets, that to me feels like a compromise too far. And the lack of support for this deal is widespread. It's, as you'll have seen, it's not one party, it's not one wing of any party. We've had ministers resign on both sides of the argument. My inbox is absolutely fit to bursting, which is why you're all here, because I can't cope with email. And you know, the polling as well is saying that people broadly are unhappy with this. And the most significant intervention for me has happened just this evening. Graham Brady, who is the chair of the 1922 committee, which, for those of you that haven't read Politics for Dummies, he essentially is the kingmaker. So he is the chair of the backbench committee, which one of his roles is he's the man who counts the 48 letters. If the letters come in around voting their confidence in the Prime Minister. And he's tonight gone on to Newsnight and to Sky to say that the Prime Minister needs to deal with that backstop in the EU withdrawal agreement or delay the vote. And when the chair of the 1922 committee is taken to the media to give that advice publicly, that tells me that the concern that we're all hearing about whether this vote will pass next week isn't just gossip or tittle-tattle. You know, this is real stuff. And, you know, both the Prime Minister and Europe have been very, very clear. This is the deal. And, you know, hats off to the Prime Minister. I think she has worked incredibly hard. She's achieved more than David Cameron ever did, genuinely. I've said it before hundreds of times, and if you've ever been to any of my surgeries or you've been to one of these meetings before, you will have heard me say, and I still stand by this, our Prime Minister is the closest thing to a public servant that you will ever find. She's more public servant than politician, I think, in some ways. And she's absolutely delivering what she believes to be her job. So it has been very hard, but she has been trying, was the phrase, to square that circle. And we are now at the point, as I always said, I would back her all the way and let her go and get that deal. But when it came to the crunch point, if that deal wasn't good enough, then that's when, as politicians, we need to decide whether that's good enough or not. And the interesting shift as well I've seen just very recently is the business view. So a lot of our big businesses, so we met with Carolyn Fairbairn from CBI a couple of weeks ago, and they were encouraging us. In fact, one big European business based here in South Cambs were encouraging us, Heidi, take the deal, take the deal. And as a business person, I found that slightly strange. But the truth of it is, you know, businesses want stability, and they were terrified of no deal. Absolutely terrified. And dare I say, still feeling like a business person who's broken into the madhouse. When you look at most politicians, if you're a business person, you probably think, I'm sure they're going to do much better than that, to take it, you know, a bird in the hand. But there are two significant things that have changed, and I spoke to this big European business again today, and he confirmed what I was thinking, the reason why they were backing that deal, and now that position is shifting. One, we've had an opinion from the ECJ that Article 50 could be revoked unilaterally by the country. And secondly, Grieve 3. We've heard of Rambo 1, Rambo 2, well, it was Grieve 3. We had Dominic Grieve's amendment this week, which I backed, which essentially says, should the deal fall next week, Parliament will have a role in deciding what happens next. And essentially, because Parliament has very, very clearly said, we ain't settling for no deal, that worry, that blackmail in some ways of no deal has been taken a little off the table. So business is now, okay, all right, let's look at that deal again, is it good enough? And one of the most interesting observations with Grieve 3, so this amendment, which is that Parliament would have a role, was that I was joined in the voting lobby by two of the Prime Minister's closest allies, Damien Green and Oliver Letwin. And Oliver is kind of a little bit like the deal maker in Parliament. He bridges the gap between us and tries and finds compromise. And the whips were very, very light touch about that vote, which tells me that government found it helpful, because we were helping to ensure that no deal wasn't going to happen. So it's acted as an insurance policy, really, against no deal, which I think has shifted the landscape and has allowed Parliament and business to feel a little bit, right, okay, so just what are the options? And for me, I think there are broadly two, and these won't be a surprise to you, I'm sure. So Norway Plus, it's had an upgrade, it's not just Norway these days, it's Norway Plus, which is essentially maintaining membership of the EEA, so like Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, which means basically the single market, and EFTA, which is essentially a customs union, a trading bloc with Europe. And there are pros and cons with this. Essentially, you are in the single market and the customs union, which for a lot of people who voted leave feels like absolutely the wrong thing and not what they voted for. So I'm not sure they would accept it. They call it Brino, Brexit in name only. Again, that rule taker, not a rule maker. But it would get you out the ECJ, it would get you out the fisheries policy, it would get you out of the common agricultural policy, which are some of the things that Brexiteers, and particularly those farmers who voted to leave, were desperate to get out of. But people would still have to pay some money in. There would still be, I suspect, freedom of movement. There are some small treaties within the EFTA that allow you a break on that, but as far as I know, only Liechtenstein has pulled that break so far. And as I was joking in the car over the way here, they've only got 12 people. So they're probably entitled to have a break on freedom of movement. I'm not sure we could have that same debate in the UK. And a year ago, I suspect EEA-EFTA would have found peace. I think the public probably would have accepted that, but because it was kind of half in, half out, yeah, okay, I can take that. But what strikes me is the big difference between then and now is that people have got a hell of a lot more engaged, and actually that's probably not the only benefit I can think of this whole Brexit debacle so far. People have got really interested in democracy and Parliament and Brexit. Well, pros and cons, and what's that all about? That now a lot of people are past that point, and they're thinking, well actually, if you're basically staying in the single market and the customs union, but you've got no say over it, why are we leaving? Yeah. Statement. But, I'll take the issue. Better than tomato. But that's the big question that people have got, which is why I kind of sense that the Norway moment might have passed, because people are kind of beyond that. So that brings me to the second option that's sort of doing the rounds, and that's the people's vote, second referendum, public vote, whatever you want to call it.
We've had a people's vote.
I'm laying out.
The decision was made.
So I'm providing the context. I'm describing the context and the options that are there and how I'm describing and giving you sort of the background to where we are. So people's vote is the other of the two. Norway and the people's vote, I think, is the second option that is growing in consideration, if you like. And not with everybody, absolutely not with everybody. And I don't seek one, I don't want one. For the noise we've already had in the room just by mentioning it, those Christmas dinner tables could get tricky again with grandparents versus grandkids. But the point is, no matter how many times you try and wargame in your head where this is going to go in Parliament, there are three people in democracy: the government, the executive, Parliament, and the people. If the government and the Parliament can't conclude, what other option is there? And that's why it's not an active choice, certainly not on my part. I can't say that for all my colleagues. Some of them I know from the day after the referendum wanted to overturn it. That's not me, I wasn't there. But it's a natural consequence, I think, of where we may end up if Parliament can't reach that conclusion itself.
Can you say what the question is?
Is there enough time for it?
I'll come on to that perhaps in the question. I'm going to wrap up in a second and take questions from you. But that is a valid point, what would the questions be on the ballot paper? So that's a broad description, I think, of where we are now. There is a suggestion that the vote might be delayed next week. Because ultimately, if the result of the vote is as catastrophic as the whips and Graham Brady clearly fears, then that would lead you into no confidence territory, etc., etc. And if you're in the Prime Minister's shoes, if you think there is anything you can do to convince more people to vote, then it'd be daft not to delay it. Number 10 are still being very firm at the moment in saying that the whip has come out. We have like an email whip document that's sent to us telling us what the business of the following week. And that's arrived in my inbox about an hour ago. And that's saying that the vote will still be on Tuesday. But that rumour's doing the rounds. You could pull it on Monday night. So that's where we are. The vote, as far as I know, will come next week. Tonight, really, that's me just setting the scene of the parameters that we're working in to try and help you understand some of the views and the context, etc. But really, it's about me hearing your questions, your worries, your concerns, doing my best to answer them. And my role, and that's why you elect me, is to weigh this all up, take those risks on board, talk to colleagues, and you probably know me well enough that I talk to colleagues of every colour in the party, of every party in Parliament, talk to the whips, talk to the government, get a sense of what might happen. Because I'm a logical person, I'm a planner, I want to plan, because ultimately my job is to make sure that whatever the outcome is, that from an economic, from a security, from a democratic point of view, we try and blunder our way very inelegantly to the best solution for the country and for South Cambs. So that's my job, is weighing it all up. And to help me do that, it's really, really important that I hear your views, your concerns. As I do, I ring businesses, I talk to businesses all the time, and scientific organisations, I spoke to Chief Executive Adam Brooks tonight. So it's all information to help me. So that's probably enough from me. We have my glamorous assistant, Paul.
We do have a mic, but you manage without one. So
would you like a mic?
Yes,
Anthony would like you to have a mic. That probably helps with this recording. So perhaps if we...